Well, guys, we're back again with another great episode. I'm so excited. Today we have Lorraine Hightower with us. And I just want to give a little backstory of how we met.
Yes.
It's one of those moments where I ruminated over it way too much after fact. But we were at the International Dyslexia Association National Conference in Dallas in 2024. And I'm there. It's the week of Halloween, and I decide I'm going to dress up like Russell from the movie Up. And
Yeah.
I have like all this gear on,
hmm
and I'm standing at my booth, and I see this classy lady coming towards me with Megan from Dyslexia on Demand. And Megan says, "Oh, Adrianne, I'd like you to meet Lorraine." And I'm just dying because you were like so classy, and here I am
Oh,
looking like a goof and
no.
just being silly that whole event. But it was so awesome to talk to you and learn a little bit about your background and the amazing work you do with students as an advocate. So today's episode is going to be all about advocacy and both a little bit of advice on the teacher side, parent side, a little bit of all of that. So I'm just going to say, let's just jump right in, Lorraine. This is going to
Yeah.
be amazing.
Oh,
You can
absolutely.
give a little background if you'd like about yourself.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I just want to say first, you did not look like a goof, and we quickly bonded over our shared passion for helping kids that do have learning differences, right? And as the law
Yes.
refers to them, learning disorders. So that was a magical moment for us, and I was so grateful to find you and your company because it is hard to find intervention specialists who really know what they're doing in the area of math. So thank you for being
Yes.
so passionate about that. And just a little bit about my background, as you said, I am an educational advocate. I have a practice based out of Northern Virginia, and we specialize in serving kids who have the specific learning disability of dyslexia. That said, just about all of the kids that we work with also have what I prefer to call co-occurring rather than a
Hmm.
comorbid condition of ADHD, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. Usually they'll have some speech issues when they're younger. So it isn't that we don't, support those disability classifications, but they're usually folded under that umbrella of dyslexia. And my journey really began, Adrianne, because I was a terrified mom who had
Mm.
a very bright, capable student, my son, who's now, an adult, but he was young and we knew that he could learn. We saw that he had the ability, but when he went to public school at a pretty young age, the teachers started expressing concerns about his ability to pay attention, to focus, to read, to write, to spell, to do math facts, right?
Mm.
It's always
Hmm.
connected, and I think that through those teacher conferences, as grateful as I was to the teachers for kind of tipping me off and telling me that they thought something, needed to be explored a little bit further, I was also shocked that when I did finally figure out through a combination of private testing and then later school district testing, we found out, my son had dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, dyscalculia, that the school system really didn't know what to do with him. They really,
Hmm.
even though they were very well intentioned, they didn't know what to do with him. So I channeled all of that personal experience, the fear, the frustration, the puzzlement into really my professional mission that I serve today, and became, certified as a dyslexia advocate, a professional mediator, anything that I could do to help parents collaboratively resolve what end up being disputes with their public school when they find out that their bright and capable student isn't getting their needs met. So that's
Yeah.
a little bit about what we do. And we help parents at every stage of the special education process, from the wondering to the figuring it out to getting the 504, the IEP in place, as well as tackling sometimes these dispute resolution steps.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's one of the things I enjoyed learning that we both had that shared commonality. I
Mhm.
have a son with dyslexia and ADHD. It
Mhm.
turns out he's gifted in mathematics, but he could not show that in the school setting. And it wasn't until he was in fifth grade that we were able to get some testing and saw that ability. And it's so encouraging to see him in the school setting.
Yeah.
He gets the support he needs on the reading side, but he's thriving in mathematics. He
Mhm.
thinks really, mathematically, and I'm
Yes.
I'm grateful that I was able to have access to that testing, to the supports. And so we share that common passion. We both want to expand that as much as possible for kids.
Yeah, and I think what really compelled me, if I can just add on, I love that you shared it took till like fifth grade, right, for your son.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my son, because it took so long to figure this out for him, and he felt a little bit like a social freak, those are his words, when he was in sixth grade, because he felt like he should be able to do what everyone could, and he wasn't able to show what he knew. He was pre-suicidal, Adrian, by
Mm,
sixth grade.
mhm.
So this work, really hit me to my core. And that's when I said, I need to help as many kids as possible, as many parents as possible, because the consequences of not knowing what to do if you have a child who learns differently and they're in the public school system, they can be really severe. And I don't really say that to scare your audience, but to just bring real awareness to the fact that our kids who learn differently are the ones that struggle with anxiety, right? They
Mhm.
have performance anxiety or social skill anxiety sometimes. And they're at a disadvantage if the teachers don't know how they learn. So they sometimes suffer, to show what they know and have a lower GPA, which has consequences related to that. Or they drop out of school because they feel like I can't even do it. Why even bother? So it is so important to create awareness around that parents have options. They have options to help their
Yes.
kids.
Yes, absolutely. And that it takes time, a lot of
Yes,
time and
right.
effort, and don't give up. And I'm so grateful for, the internet making it easier for us to connect and support each other. Because when I first started out, and I'm sure you related with
Yes.
this, that wasn't as common. It was quite
Right.
rare, took
Mhm.
some time, for people to start creating groups and help each other with
Yeah.
the advocacy side and educating each other. So I really love that. So
Yes.
let's jump into what does an advocate do? Because a parent may hear this phrase like you should
Sure.
consider getting an advocate, and they
Yeah.
may not even know exactly what you do and when is the time that you would hire one.
Yes. Well, educational advocates, I first want to say, can be generalist or they can be specialist. And I feel like that's an important distinction because if you have a child, for example, who has dyslexia or dyscalculia, you want to make sure that the advocate has experience in
Mm,
speaking to the needs of those students, right? And an advocate's role is not to take the place of the parent. They should be working hand in hand with the parent, but advocates speak to the need, the issue, or the desired goal, right? So a lot
mhm.
of times I will strategize with parents beforehand to really understand their concerns, their fears, what they want in terms of goals with the school system. And then I will take the lead in those conversations because they're really not used to going kind of toe to toe with school districts. It's
Right.
quite a process to navigate. So advocates also serve as a guide through the special education process, which can be lengthy. There are important timelines. There's different paths parents can take. They may not know the pros and cons to take, if I go this way, is my child going to be in the right setting? If I agree to this intervention, is it really going to be helpful? So we do help serve as consultants when it comes to putting effective and appropriate educational plans in place. I would also say from time to time, we act as shields for parents.
Mm,
Sometimes when parents walk into a school setting, they may even have some of the same disabilities that their children have. So a lot of information coming at them, if they have a challenge processing all of that, if they have a challenge reading, they really don't know how to respond in that moment. And if there's, someone like me who this is all you do every day, working professionally and collaboratively with school systems. You understand special education law, even though you're not an attorney. You understand parent rights. You know what an appropriate and effective IEP should look like for the child to make meaningful progress. We serve in all of those ways. And I would say we also help to keep school teams accountable, right? Not that school
mhm.
teams are ill-intentioned, but everybody is kind of overworked and underpaid, unfortunately, in the
Yes.
education world, right? And so resources sometimes go in one direction and not another. And yet there are federal obligations. So an advocate can kindly remind the school district that there are these obligations. And if a child has an IEP or a 504 plan, they're not nice to haves, they're must haves. And if necessary, we can kind of intensify the conversation, still being professional, but more assertive about the parents' procedural safeguards and what might resolve the issue, for the parent and the school. So there's a lot of ways that parents can benefit from having an advocate in the conversation. And I think the second part of your question, Adrienne, was when do you know, right? If you should get
Hmm.
an
Hmm.
advocate involved. Number one for me and many of our clients is how is your child doing first and foremost?
Yeah.
One of the biggest red flags is school refusal or changes in behavior that you don't either see before they started the school year, or you don't see these behaviors when you're on an extended break, like a long weekend or spring break or winter break. So that tells parents something is going on in that environment that is causing conflict for the student, right? I would also say, adding on to behaviors, believe it or not, I have seen very young children, even in kindergarten and first grade, be at risk for being suspended or expelled from their school because they have such frustration in that
Hmm.
environment and they are expressing it through their behavior. And often the school district will misinterpret those behaviors and take that disciplinary action without peeling back the layers to figure out why is the student responding this way? Could
Right.
there be a learning disability or difference? What else should we explore? So behavior to me is a huge red flag. I would also say if your child already has an IEP or a 504 plan and you're attending these meetings and you don't feel like you're being heard or your concerns and about the needs for your child are being dismissed, that's a problem, right? Because both Section 504 and IDEA, which Section 504 is the access law, right? Equal access with no discrimination, and IDEA is education law. They both require parent involvement, and IDEA requires parent participation. So you have equal voice as everyone around
Yeah.
the table. And if you feel that you're not receiving that, you might need to partner with an advocate to ensure that you are being heard. I would also say one of the most important reasons to get an advocate involved is if your child's not making progress, right? They're not making progress with their grade level curriculum, whether or not you have an IEP or a 504 plan, something needs to change. And
Yes.
advocates can help the school team dive into the data, the skill data, the district assessment data, look for those red flags, those areas of need, and start asking deeper questions about how are these needs being addressed? And maybe we should address them differently. So
Yeah.
that gives your listeners some ideas of when to bring an advocate into the conversation. And some parents just say, I don't have the time or the inclination to try to learn everything that I might need to know about my child's complex learning profile. So I will come to all the meetings and I'll be highly engaged, but I need to trust someone who does this every day and knows how to get these desired results to really take the lead.
Yeah, absolutely. And some parents may have had an experience similar to mine where you show up to these meetings and it can feel like an us versus them moment,
Mhm.
right? And
Exactly.
you weren't necessarily prepared for that. And it's not that the school is trying to set up something like that, it's that they're trying to communicate with the staff that all works together, right?
Right.
But without that kind of grounding observation, you can walk in there and feel like maybe you're going to be attacked today
Yes.
and you're feeling nervous and on shaky ground that maybe your parenting had something to do with what's going on, right? And so you start getting a lot of head baggage. What I like about the advocate piece is that's someone to sit on your side of the table,
Mhm.
right? And then when you're feeling anxious, step in and help you communicate better, like you said. I think it's such a needed thing because the emotions run high in those meetings.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the toughest thing is to advocate for your own child,
Oh, absolutely.
because as you said, everybody is emotionally linked to their child. And one of the things that I think is really hard for parents, because a skilled advocate doesn't come from a place of emotion, they use the data to do the talking,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So as parents, we come in with our heart. We lead with our heart and not our head. And that doesn't always land well with school teams, right? Because they will empathize with you and they will let you talk about everything you think about your child, but they're really only going to take meaningful action when there's data, usually from more than one data point or assessment or
Hmm.
skill
Hmm.
assessment. They're only going to take action when you have the data to back up your request.
Right, right. And that makes sense.
If you've ever wondered why math feels so hard for a student, then this is for you. Made for Math has released a free guide called How to Get Assessed for a Math Learning Disability. It's your step-by-step guide to uncover what's really going on and how to help. Whether you're a parent, teacher, or professional, this resource takes the confusion out of the process so kids can finally get the support they need to thrive. Click the link in the show notes to get your free guide.
Yeah.
So speaking of the data side, what kinds of data would maybe be a trigger to the parent, besides like maybe the obvious, your child's failing over and over and
Yes.
over, but
Right.
how can they start tracking some of that and gathering that data? What would you recommend around that as they start to build the case?
Yes. Well, if your child is in the public school system, regardless of the state that they're in, at the beginning of the school year, and usually at kind of the mid-school year point and at the end of the school year, there's all kinds of district and statewide assessments that are typically given to students. And typically they're in the areas primarily of reading and math. A few school districts will do some writing assessments, but I find that to be more on the rare side.
Mm-hmm.
And some schools, I actually have like literacy screeners when the school year starts, thanks to some increasing awareness about how we
Yes.
struggle as a country with literacy.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I find is parents don't always get copies of these screening tools or assessment. So I think starting to, if you see your child struggling, as we talked about, the behaviors, something is a red flag for you. I would first reach out and ask for what are the available assessments, skill assessments, screeners, district assessments that have been done. And I would ask for the comprehensive report, not just
Mm.
the cover page with the composite score. And the other thing I always tell parents is you need some kind of interpretation grid, right? So if you just get a score and it says 420, you don't know if that's out of 430 or if that's out of 1200. So parents, when they get these screeners and these assessments, they need a way to interpret them. So they should feel comfortable to ask the teacher or the special education teacher, if they have one, to explain what are these results showing you, and how do we interpret if my child's on grade level benchmark, under grade level benchmark, how much below? Does this mean they're at risk? Meeting the
Mm-hmm.
mark? Are they at high risk, low risk? Like there's just for parents to know, all of these assessment tools have a way of interpreting the data. It is rarely fully disclosed to parents. So that would be the first step that I would take. And if you see that your child is not meeting grade level or assessment expectations, I would ask the teacher, like, well, what are you observing in the classroom? This data is concerning to me because it looks like my child is struggling with basic math facts or spelling or reading, what have you. And if the teacher says, yes, I have some of those shared concerns and I've noticed, work avoidance, or whatever they might say about your
Mm-hmm.
child, then
Mm-hmm.
as a parent, you need to decide, do I want to make a request to the district to do a more comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation because I now suspect that my child could have a learning difference or a disability? Because an evaluation, Adrienne, you probably know this from your own lived experience, that is the most meaningful way to start a formal conversation
Yeah.
with a school district that you have significant concerns and that you want norm referenced standardized data that's going to compare your child to all of their same age and grade level peers across the country. And the reason that's important is because grades are subjective. And
Yep.
again, I'm not saying this because I'm very pro teacher. I think teaching is one of the hardest jobs out there, but teachers will sometimes give extra credit for effort, or they
Yep.
will, give extra credit for creativity. And not that those aspects of learning are not important, but when you really need to know, how is my child doing with a math problem solving or math fact fluency or decoding or phonemic awareness, you need specific skill assessments to tell you how they're doing. You can't just see a B in English language arts and figure that out, or a C in math and know everything you might need to know.
Yes, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And I also find that gathering an assessment and sharing that evidence, right? They part of that process is they go to the teacher fills out some questionnaires too. When we
Mhm.
went through that process, his teachers came back to me and said, I had no idea that he was struggling like this, because maybe parents listening can relate to this. he could hold it together somewhat at school. And
Right.
then when he would get home to me, it was melting down,
Mhm.
crying.
Yes.
Homework would take hours and hours and hours. And I finally got to the point where I would let the teachers know, okay, we spent 3 hours working on this worksheet.
Right.
This is not going to happen, right?
Yes.
And
And
they just didn't know.
you're right. Well, and a couple of things. I love that you shared that because, first of all, students who have any type of a specific learning disability, whether it's dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia, what have you, they are often bright or at least of average intelligence. And these are the children that fly under the radar because they're typically not a behavior problem. They're
Mhm.
hardworking, they're resilient. So they do, Adrianne, keep it together at school, and then they come home and kind of fall apart, or they try to avoid school, right? Or they stop playing with friends because they're so exhausted because school has taken
Mhm.
everything out of them. But at the same time, what you're also talking about is by sharing your parent data, like things like homework is taking 3 hours. My child is like my son used to hide under the table in the kitchen and refuse to come up and sit in the chair to work on his spelling words, right? That may sound anecdotal, and it somewhat is, but that is talking about the adverse impact your child's learning differences
Mhm.
are having on them. And so after these evaluations are done, there's going to be some type of an eligibility meeting and conversation about, okay, does your child have a disability? And then it's a two-pronged decision. Does that disability or learning difference have any kind of an adverse impact on them? That's what IDEA is looking at. Is there an adverse impact? When we think of Section 504, they're looking at what major life activity is substantially restricted, right? So
Mhm.
parents can share their observations, their anecdotal data from home. It's actually very meaningful in those eligibility meetings when you're looking at adverse effects or how restricted a child is.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And, it made it difficult for my son to participate in things he enjoyed after school sports because school just took it out of him
Yeah.
every single day. And he
Yes.
wasn't playing with his peers. He needed a rest when he got home.
I
So
know.
I think it's important for us to share these stories because
Yeah.
they just don't know.
Right.
And it's difficult. So once you start getting an IEP in place in 504, these
Hmm.
are adjustments that can be made for the student and modifications,
Hmm.
but sometimes they don't go as planned and maybe they're not being implemented, which can happen.
Hmm.
So what do you recommend with that when you're starting to observe things aren't happening, maybe like extra time on a test or word problems are not being read out loud to your child like you have in your planning? And what would you recommend that parents do in that situation?
Yeah, first of all, an important distinction is that when we are talking about 504, a
Mhm.
504 plan is primarily an accommodation plan. It may include a few related services, but it's primarily an accommodation plan. It is not optional. Okay, so there's a
Yep.
lot of school individuals that I've met that, again, they just don't know what they don't know. They think it's more of like suggestions for the teacher to implement. So if a 504 accommodation plan is not being implemented, parents should contact the school's 504 coordinator, is what they're technically called, and say, I am concerned that my child's 504 plan is not being implemented as it is written, and it feels like it is out of compliance, right?
Hmm.
And start a conversation. I mean, I do believe in giving the school a team to self-correct, course correct, but you may have to remind them that this was thoughtfully put together based on your child's diagnosis of a disability and that their major life activity of reading or learning or concentrating, they need these accommodations, right? If under IDEA, it's a little bit different because an IEP has multiple components to it. So it is to include a present level page where, I'm saying this because sometimes I see IEPs and the child's in ninth grade and the present level data is from third grade and nobody's updated
Yeah.
it. So
Ooh,
it happens all the time, Adrian.
yeah.
It didn't, but it happens,
Yeah.
right? So when I'm looking at an IEP, I start with the data. What is the present levels of performance saying the child's needs are? What academic data is in this IEP to justify those needs? Or do we actually need to do some additional assessments to ensure the IEP is identified the right needs? Maybe they've
Yep.
changed over the years, right? Once we figure out and have agreement, at least the parents and I, through some data informed processes, these are the needs of your child. Then I start dissecting the goals. And are these goals written to be what, we all have heard of as SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time bound? But the other watch out is, what are the goals asking the student to do? Because they should be ambitious. They should be in line with the student's cognitive ability. They should not be low bar goals that aren't
Mhm.
closing these identified learning gaps. All children are expected to make at least 1 year of academic progress, whether or not they have a disability. Children who have a learning difference or a disability have to make more than 1 year's progress if we're trying to close these gaps. And too often, I will see school teams say, well, we don't want to push too hard, or we don't want to overwhelm, or that's too many goals. But if a child has multiple needs, they need multiple goals. And often the specially designed instruction, especially like for a child with dyslexia, can address multiple needs at once. Because if they're getting
Yes.
structured literacy, they can have goals for phonemic awareness and decoding and encoding and fluency, even comprehension. It gets all folded under the umbrella of structured literacy. So sometimes parents are kind of talked out of, oh, we can only have 3 goals, or we're going to overwhelm your child. So I start at the very beginning of the IEP, look at the data, look at the needs, start looking at the goals. What kind of assistive technology and accommodations are in place? How can this child show what they know while we're remediating,
Hmm.
providing some kind of an appropriate intervention? Because, if it's a math fact fluency problem, they should have a calculator accommodation. And even though we may want them to try to learn their math facts and improve that, if they're in 5th grade, they have to have a tool to support them,
Yeah.
to show what they know, or they're not going to pass the test or the assessment. So it's really a comprehensive overview that I do. And then let's just say all those things are in place and it's a beautiful IEP and it's still not being implemented. Well, parents absolutely have to reconvene the IEP team and find out, why is it not being implemented, right? Is it the teacher doesn't have the required training? The time is not enough to make meaningful progress. The setting may not be appropriate. It's usually a combination of the intervention's not intensive or repetitive enough, or they're not using an appropriate curriculum taught by a qualified individual to teach that
Mm.
curriculum,
Yeah.
or, it's just a case of somebody inherited this IEP and they're not familiar with the disability, and, they really have no idea what they're doing. Unfortunately, that happens too. So and we can talk about parents' procedural safeguards, but it really could be any combination of those things. And it starts with, dissecting it, talking to the team. Again, this is where an advocate can really help be a catalyst for parents,
Mm.
because I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of IEPs, and if you have nothing to compare it to, you don't always know, is this a good IEP? Is this going to lead to meaningful progress? Are these goals? I mean, I see all these different components. Is that ambitious enough for my child? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I
And
think these
sometimes,
things are so important.
yeah, I was just going to say, Adrian, like your son being gifted, those children are the hardest to advocate for parents,
Oh,
because
yeah.
they're already performing at such a high cognitive ability that school teams, without someone really requiring that they look at each little subtest of data, they will miss that child has unique learning needs, because, like to your point, they compensate so well. So we find
Hmm.
parents who have twice exceptional kids or gifted kids, they actually have the most difficult time even getting a 504 plan, because they don't look substantially restricted to the team.
Yep.
Like, and
Yep.
I remember just recently I helped a young man who wanted to be an engineer, and he's brilliant, right, at math, but to get into the academy engineering program that was offered in his community at the high school level, he had to do a lengthy writing assessment and he had 0 accommodations. And
Oof.
he had dyslexia. So
Yeah.
he couldn't pass it. He had tried and tried. So, I mean, it sounds simple, but that's a life-changing accommodation. We ultimately got him a 504 plan. He got into the program. He's an engineer. I'm based out of Virginia. He went on to Virginia Tech, which has a great engineering program. But I mean, that's just one example of a
Hmm.
huge difference that can be made for, a child who looks like they're very high functioning and high performing.
Yeah, those twice exceptional kids are very tricky. We have a team member that has a child with the same kind of things, very gifted, but struggles to show what she really knows. And her mom spends a lot of time reteaching
Yeah,
everything she's learning at school. And finally, she went back to the school and said, "Hey, this isn't working. For
right.
me to have to reteach an entire day of school after
Mhm.
hours is exhausting for her and me. This isn't cutting it." And
Right.
it's just speaking up, because those kids they look like they're doing fine, right? But
Mhm.
they are not. They're struggling on a whole nother different level. It's
Right.
very
And
frustrating.
that's great that the parent was willing to share that. If that's the other thing I would really implore your listeners to do. I think sometimes as parents, we have our own like guilt and shame around having a child who learns differently. You kind of
Hmm.
alluded to that a little bit in our
Hmm.
conversation. But the sooner that you disclose the challenges your child is having at home, the faster you can get the supports and services in place through the school district, whatever they might need to be to really kind of create that family school partnership and kind of bring peace and harmony back to your home. And I think too often parents try, again, we all have the best intentions with our kids. So we don't want to see them frustrated. So we read aloud to them during homework, or we just scribe, what you want to say to me and I'll write it for you. But we don't always disclose that to the school district that that's happening behind the scenes. And what I think parents find in the long run is that's kind of a disservice because now the school district has gotten comfortable with you accommodating your child, and it's harder for them to see the true need.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really helpful to point that out. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
So I'm curious more along the lines of, when I'm speaking to teachers, they want to serve these students better. And it's not their fault that they didn't necessarily learn these things when they were in their teacher education programs, right? They're being taught to be a generalist and
Right.
to know a lot about lots of things. And unfortunately, they don't get as much as they should about dyslexia or dyscalculia or any of the others. But we are seeing some movements, I would say, in legislation and
Yes.
among the states. What kinds of things are you seeing that states are starting to put in place to help protect and safeguard some of these students?
Well, definitely awareness around learning differences in general has really significantly increased. I think that's the biggest difference I've noticed in the last 20 years is that
Hmm.
people don't look at you like a deer in the headlights when you say dyslexia or ADHD or dysgraphia. They're like, oh, I kind of know of something about that. But to your point, they're really not trained. So a lot of important legislation has been passed in a handful of states to really change teacher training. And whether that's at at their curriculum level when they're studying to be a teacher, or once they're in the district, they're getting more comprehensive training on you know, we could have a discussion on whether I think it's
Yeah.
adequate, but they're learning structured literacy. I've even seen, curriculum specialists for math who have a more varied background that can consult and collaborate with teams if the general education instruction is not impactful. So I do like the awareness and the teacher training. That is definitely different. There's even changes in curriculums. A lot of school
Hmm.
districts are realizing that the curriculum that they've used for 20 years really did not deliver the results that it should have. And again, I can't say it enough. It's shocking to me that Congress appointed a national reading panel in 2000 and they did a great report. The National Reading Panel had a great report on how we should be teaching reading, and yet 25 years later, we're just starting to see those recommendations get folded into some of our public school curriculums. So I would also say that assistive technology tools have become a lot more normalized. Even things
Hmm.
like calculators being used on assessments, not just for kids who learn differently, but calculators for all students. There's much
Yes.
openness to that. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't understand the math concepts, right? So I like what's happening with even what I would call some changes with testing. There's been a lot of changes in different states on the core curriculum or standards of learning where we're not overly assessing our children. I do think performance assessments at certain intervals are really important, but a lot of kids don't test well. So I like that certain states are looking at kind of eliminating some of these barrier tests or assessments to other educational opportunities. Kind of like I was talking about with that engineering student who had to, get a certain score on a writing assessment when he's going to go into engineering. And he probably could have just used speech to text, right? Instead of having to
Yeah.
write everything because he had dysgraphia as well.
Yeah.
I do think the world is becoming a lot friendlier and realizing that some of these changes need to be made. At the same time, I think knowledge and implementation are still pretty far apart. So I don't want
Yes.
to sugarcoat it because
Yes.
awareness and knowing it is one thing. And I keep waiting for the day when I can retire, Adrianne. But, I feel like I'm still surprised at this day and age when I attend certain school meetings that there's huge gaps in knowledge and there's huge gaps in what we could do and should do, and there's still resistance around it. So
Hmm.
the educational system in our country is huge, right? And
Yep.
curriculums are big business. So, we could go on a soapbox about all of that.
We could. Yes.
But just trying to affect that change, it doesn't happen, as you said, overnight. So there is definitely light in the tunnel. And I think the more that parents are seeking advocate help, private specialist help, private tutors, and they're folding them into these conversations, it's kind of motivating public schools to improve and strengthen and build up what they offer. Because, again, not to get political, but there's been a lot of discussion on should there be school choice and vouchers and what have you. And I'm a huge fan of public schools. But I do understand the parents who feel like their child's needs are not being met in the public schools. And why is that? And how, as a country, are we okay with all of our students graduating and reading on a fourth grade level across the board on
Yeah.
average? We're reading at
Yes.
a fourth grade level as a country. Like, that's just not okay. So,
No.
yeah,
No, it's exciting. What I hope will happen eventually is that the things that you and I know, they don't benefit just students with learning disabilities.
that's
They're
right.
good for all learners,
That's right.
And so if we can learn how to do these things in the teacher community and
Yeah,
start using them with everyone, the tide rises for everybody. And
right.
that is exciting to me. And so I hope that we can keep having these conversations and make education more accessible for all students, no matter what their circumstances are.
Yes, and I want to encourage your audience again to use their voice because I think it's easy to assume that I'm just one parent or I'm just in this community, and that's not going to make a meaningful difference to the large system. Part of what I did in my own frustration and fear for my son was I started, doing public comment at school board meetings and at state education meetings, and then I met a couple of parents and we worked with legislators and we helped pass legislation on mandatory teacher training on dyslexia, and we really didn't even think that was possible. And the reason I'm sharing that example is because everybody has elected officials that we are constituents of in whatever capacity and where you live, a town, a district, a state, a country, right? And I think we underestimate the impact that a quick email, a letter, a phone call can have on some of these elected officials. And I say that because when I was talking to legislators and senators and House representatives at both the state and the federal level, I learned from their legislative aides that when they received input 5 times on a topic, let's just say it had to do with dyslexia, it actually went on the agenda. It went on the elected officials' agenda to some degree to dig deeper, to talk to someone, to take a meeting. So that's not that many people. You
That's
know what I mean?
not,
And
yes.
I say this to parents all the time because, these folks are elected to represent you. And so don't be hesitant to talk to your school board members, your senators, your congressmen, your congresspeople, women. Like, let your voice be known while you're still trying to do everything for your child. Share it with a wider audience.
Hmm. Hmm. I love that. Lorraine, I could just talk all day about this topic, and I think everyone else is probably fascinated as well. But I know you have an offer for people because there is ways to dig deeper with you
Yes.
on these things. Would you like to talk about what that is
Yeah,
with our
sure.
audience?
Well, first of all, we are, as I said, based out of Virginia. However, we help families across the country through consultative services, done for you, virtual advocacy services. And we even have parent training opportunities that parents have found
Mm,
super helpful, where we kind of teach you how to advocate more effectively for your own child. But for your audience, Adrianne, I would love to extend a special discounted offer to do a parent consultation with me, where they can actually send in to us for my review up to 3 documents. It could be a 504 plan, an IEP, a private evaluation, a school district evaluation, a progress report, whatever, a work sample, whatever they want to send. And because I do this every day, all day, and I've done it for hundreds and hundreds of kids, I can pretty quickly have a lot of red flags jump out to me and be able to offer helpful advice and recommendations on here's how you could get things more on course. Here's how you can ensure that this IEP is implemented. So parents find those consultations to be super helpful, and they
mhm.
pretty much leave with a roadmap of next steps. And it's really for anyone at whatever stage you're in. You might have a child with dyslexia and not know, what do I even do with that? So at whatever stage you're in, I love meeting parents. I spend an hour online going over whatever they sent to me, identifying all those red flags, and then giving them recommended next steps on how you can quickly course correct. And that is discounted at $100 off. So it's typically $497 for
Mm,
us to review all those documents and to do that 1 hour meeting. And we are offering it to your Made for Math community for $397.
awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link up to that.
Sure.
And also just tell people how can they find you online in addition
Yeah.
to this?
Absolutely. So if you search Lorraine Hightower or Lorraine M. Hightower LLC, we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. The website is just lorrainehightower.com. And yeah, we'd love to have anyone reach out to us, to send me a direct message, engage in whatever way is comfortable for you and your family. But we are passionate about the work that we do. I do have a team of teachers and certified dyslexia advocates. All of us are parents as well. So we
Awesome.
would just love to support anybody in your community in however we can.
Awesome. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And then lastly, as you know, we always like to end with a joke, and you've
Yes.
got a cute little ditty right here. Do you want to share it?
Yes. Well, when you asked me, to share a joke, or I think you said some kind of a phrase, the thing
Yeah.
that came to mind for me when I thought of math is accountability. So I said to Adrianne, I'm really here to put the count back in accountability with school districts. And I mean that collaboratively and professionally. But at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, these are federal obligations, and these kids deserve these protections. They are bright, capable students. They're usually very resilient and hardworking. They want to show what they know. And so, however, I can continue to support them by collaboratively holding teams accountable is really my joy and my honor.
I love it. Thank you so much for being with us today, Lorraine. Let's have you back again here soon.
Yeah, well, I would love it. And thank you, Adrianne. I appreciate the opportunity to meet your audience.